Hello, my name is Amir Scott, and today I'll be presenting on cancel culture, disposability, accountability, and restorative justice. Now, whether or not you have perused social media spaces before, I'm sure you've come across the term cancel culture as of late. Before we even open, let me say how terrified I was when writing about this topic during my freshman year in nonfiction prose, since I had never written on social media concepts or interactions before, and it seemed like it was a completely foreign concept that would never be validated in academia. And now, my professors have the same discourses that I spend all of my hours on Twitter having. Isn't that wild? But on cancel culture, something which we hear a lot, but don't necessarily have a solid definition for. It's something that's very often disputed from person to person. Some people may say it's just the due diligence of seeking accountability for misdeeds, and others may say that it's an excessive overuse and suppression of freedom of speech. Now, the definitive origins of cancel culture tie back to where many of Twitter's trends begin, what is colloquially referred to as Black Twitter, which is the collection of Black users who peruse Twitter. It was most used by Black women who sought to hold high-profile figures accountable for harm that they caused to communities. You see the language X is canceled, often used in reference to concerts, where musicians would have to call off the concert due to sickness or due to weather conditions. However, this phrase was repurposed, and it was used as a statement to state that you were retracting your support from this person for whatever that reason may be, whether that be misogyny, queerphobia, ableism, a majority of different discriminatory practices or beliefs or actions. Honestly, the reasons vary from person to person. So if we see that that is the beginning of where cancel culture has originated, you may see why I've become a bit concerned as of late in the way that we discuss this. What does it mean to hold somebody accountable, and to what extent does that apply? In this case, it was very much boycotting, deplatforming people, but we've seen in recent years that it's extended to something far beyond that, to the very extremes of doxing and harassment on the internet, sometimes even ensuring that people are out of jobs and that they lose complete access to opportunities. This has a very different dynamic, I think, when you consider the role of celebrity and you consider the role of the average person who is not a celebrity. Obviously, celebrities, politicians, and other people who hold power and access that we don't have live completely different lives from those of us who are just average members of society. It is evident why cancel culture, so-called cancel culture, would be applicable and necessary for holding somebody of high status accountable. But what does it mean from person to person in our average everyday lives? You can't completely disinvest from a person the way that you can from a celebrity, as they don't produce work. They aren't an artist or a musician or an actor of high-profile status. They don't have movies or art pieces which you can completely disinvest from and boycott. So it comes to the topic of restorative justice and punitive justice. When somebody has committed wrong against you, what is your reaction? What is your response? How do they go about seeking forgiveness? And how do you go about granting such forgiveness? Forgiveness is a very nuanced concept which I think as of late we have struggled to gain a hold on. We believe that forgiveness is something that is absolute and gifted to us regardless of our actions and our apologies or lack thereof. And sometimes we don't understand that we have been granted forgiveness, and that doesn't necessarily mean that things will resume as normal. It is completely possible for people to forgive you and not wish to continue a relationship with you. For people to forgive you, but still not feel comfortable being around you or interacting with you. And we see that this becomes very evident as you get to more harmful practices such as abuse and assault. I think there is a lot of flattening that happens around the topic of cancel culture and the topic of restorative justice versus punitive justice. So often they are contrasted from one another, but I would like to argue that they aren't quite as different as one may think. In a just society, it is necessary that we have both restoration and punishment. One cannot commit misdeeds without ever serving retribution to those whom they have harmed. However, the idea of focusing on this punishment is already a flaw in the way that we approach these matters. It is important that we prioritize and center the victims in situations of harm and misdoing, as opposed to those who are the perpetrators. If you think about a family who has suffered from the loss of a family member at the hands of an unjust murder, so often we think, well, obviously the murderer must go to jail. That's the end of it. Do we ever think about how that family is restored? Do we ever think about how that family is rehabilitated? What are the necessary steps to ensure that this family can be once again in a state where they feel whole, where they feel that what they have suffered is accounted for? It's fine and dandy if you want to instate a system of carcerality on that person who has committed the crime, but so often we shaft the victims and push them to the side, never fully thinking about what it is that they need from the situation. And I think that is where we come to the balance between restorative justice and punitive justice. It is very easy to shove somebody to the side, but how hard is it to console somebody, especially when you don't necessarily have the equipment to properly console that person? Sometimes people experience things that we have never been through, and I think that is where the importance of community comes about. We have such vast and diverse experiences, yet at the same time we have so much in common. You can serve as so much of an asset to somebody by utilizing the things that you have experienced that they have also been through as a means of understanding and empathizing with them, as a means of bringing healing towards them. If a person believes that there are certain steps that need to be taken for them to feel that they have been in a situation where they have received justice or where the other person has been held accountable, I believe it's important that we hear them out and aren't so quick to state that they are overstepping the boundary of what is acceptable. If you think about the wrongs that have been committed against you and what you have felt is the necessary response, then you'd understand why tone policing and telling that person that they are wrong for how they are processing the trauma in the moment is certainly something that we should avoid. Obviously, there is a deep situation of policing and accountability and punitive nature within our society. I think even if we go back to who has started this trend of canceling, we notice that it is Black women. If anybody understands anti-carcerality, I say it would be Black people living in America, as the prison population is a majority made of Black people who have committed nonviolent crimes. And Black women in particular, case in point Angela Davis and Assata Shakur, have been some of the biggest contributors to anti-carcerality movements and theory. I think there is a radical shifting of society which we must begin to usher into, where we reconsider the ways in which we punish people and we reconsider what we define as justice. This all ties into a greater issue of disposability politics. So often people complain about cancel culture, and I feel that sometimes it's a complaint about facing consequences, and what people are really upset about is disposability culture, which, if you allow me to summarize, is how we interact with not only objects, but people within our society, where we see what is the purpose of this object, what use does it serve us, and once it fails to serve us, what do we do with it? We shove it to the side, we dispose of it. And this is sometimes how we interact with people, where when people turn out not to be who we want them to be or expect them to be, then they are suddenly of no use to us. And I don't think that's how a person of the faith would move around issues like this. We are taught that our siblings are valuable, that they are fearfully and wonderfully made, and that it is important that we embrace them as members of our community. You are not entitled, obviously, to embrace people who will continually harm you, who have shown no remorse about harming you and fully intend to continue harming you. However, in situations where harm is not extreme, and in situations where it is clear that there is a desire for accountability, that there is a desire for apologies, and for moving on in a way that can bring restoration to an individual, I think it's important that we fulfill that and that we recognize when people are being genuine and when mistakes are genuinely made and can be genuinely recovered from. Disposability politics also affects those of us who are the most marginalized. Think about disabled individuals and what role they can play in society, and how often it is framed around what use they serve to other people, and not the fact that their mere existence is something that should be cherished. Think about how often the voices of marginalized people are downplayed, are ignored, aren't even given the opportunity to be voiced. This is where disposability must be focused on most. Same as restorative justice, victims are where disposability politics must be focused on most. You can complain about how people are being met with unnecessary vitriol, but you must remember that the celebrities that so often are brought into this conversation, their names are remembered and their names are known. How many of their victims can you name? How many of their victims do you know the fates of? I think it's very evident to us where our attention must be centered, and it must be on accountability, making sure that we are opposing disposability for those of us who are most vulnerable, and ensuring that restoration is brought to those who have been harmed.